The room smelled of lemon polish and disappointment. Alara traced the worn pattern of the armchair with a fingertip, counting the faded floral motifs. 4 on the seat cushion, 8 on the back, 22 overall. It was easier to count the flowers than to look at the woman sitting across from her. The one with the tightly pursed lips and eyes that darted away whenever Alara's gaze inadvertently brushed hers. They always darted away. This was the 5th family this year. The 5th set of kind, strained smiles that dissolved into polite, firm rejections. The whispers followed her out. Difficult? Odd? Doesn't connect? Something not quite right. They wanted a child who giggled on command, who made eye contact, who didn't flinch at sudden noises or arrange their peas by size before eating them. Alara just wanted a quiet corner and to be left alone with her thoughts, which were usually far more orderly than the chaotic world around her. She heard the matron's familiar, weary sigh from the doorway. Alara, dear, perhaps you could wait in the hall for a moment? It was the signal, the quiet dismissal before the final judgment was delivered. Alara nodded, not meeting anyone's eyes, and slid from the chair. The wool of her dress felt scratchy against her skin, a constant, low irritation. Out in the hall, the familiar chill of the orphanage settled deep. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate, not the light, hesitant steps of potential parents. A woman stood before her, taller than most, dressed in rough-spun fabric and worn leather. Her face was weathered, lines etched around keen, assessing eyes the color of dried earth. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a platitude. She simply looked at Alara, head tilted slightly, like an animal studying a foreign object. There was no pity, no strained kindness, just observation. It was unsettling, yet strangely less frightening than the forced smiles. "You're Alara?" the woman stated, her voice low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a dry creek bed. Alara nodded, gripping the fabric of her dress. She braced herself for the inevitable turning away, the polite exit. Instead, the woman turned to the matron. "She'll do," she said, her tone final, like closing a gate. The matron blinked, surprised. "Do? Miss Martha, are you certain?" "She is. She requires a great deal of." Understanding, Martha didn't look back at the matron. Her eyes remained on Alara, though not at her, more, encompassing her. "Understanding is earned, not given," Martha replied, her gaze steady. "Does she eat?" "Yes." "Does she walk?" "Yes." "Does she breathe?" "Miss Martha, really? She is a child." "Then she'll do," Martha repeated, turning fully towards Alara now. "My name's Martha. Gather your things. You're coming with me." Alara stared. Her things? A small trunk containing few clothes, a worn blanket, and a handful of pebbles she'd collected over the years, each chosen for its perfect smoothness or unique color. No one had ever asked her to gather them before. They usually just left. A tremor went through her, not entirely of fear. It was the unsettling jolt of the unexpected, a disruption to the pattern. She looked into Martha's eyes, searching for the pity or the judgment, and found only a quiet, resolute patience. The journey was long. Days blurred into a sequence of jangling carriage wheels, the rhythmic sway, and the changing sense of the air outside. Alara sat pressed against the carriage wall, eyes wide as the familiar, ordered world of the town receded, replaced by endless, rolling plains under a sky that seemed impartially vast. Dust coated everything of the windows, their clothes, the very air they breathed. It settled on Alara's tongue, gritty and dry. The constant rumble of the wheels was a vibration through the floorboards, up her spine, buzzing in her teeth. She hummed low in her throat, a quiet, repetitive note, trying to match the frequency and make it less intrusive. Martha drove the wagon herself, reins held with competent hands, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She spoke little. Occasionally, she would point a calloused finger towards a distant shape, a hawk circling, a lone tree etched against the sky, a smudge that might be mountains far away. "Hawk," she'd say. Or, "That's where the land starts to climb." Her words were sparse, declarative, like markers in the landscape. She didn't demand conversation. She didn't try to coax stories or smiles. She simply existed beside Alara, a solid, silent presence. Alara found herself watching Martha's hands, the way they handled the reins, the way they unrolled a bedroll at night, the way they started a fire with swift, practiced movements. There was a quiet competence about everything Martha did that was deeply calming amidst the sensory assault of the open country. At night, under a canopy of stars Alara had only ever seen in books, the silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the soft snorting of the horses. It was a different kind of overwhelm, not the jarring noise of the orphanage, but a vast, deep quiet that felt both empty and full. Martha slept near the fire, wrapped in her blanket, her face impassive even in sleep. Alara lay awake, tracing the unfamiliar constellations Martha had pointed out before settling down. The Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, Orion's Belt. Patterns in the chaos. Safe patterns. As the days passed, Alara began to notice things. Martha always left a small tin cup of water within Alara's easy reach inside the wagon. She never commented on Alara's humming or the way she lined up the few biscuits they ate for supper before taking a bite. Once, when Alara flinched violently at a sudden crack of thunder, Martha simply reached out and placed a steady hand on Alara's knee for a moment before returning it to the reins. No words, just the quiet weight of contact. Grounding. It was these small, deliberate acts, not filtered through false cheer or expectation, that began to chip away at the wall Alara had built around herself. When they finally arrived, the house was small, built low to the ground as if hunkering against the wind. It stood alone on a vast stretch of land, surrounded by corrals and outbuildings. The air here smelled of dry earth, hay, and horses. It was a strong, honest smell. Inside, the house was simple, clean, and quiet. There were woven rugs on the floor, sturdy wooden furniture, and a fireplace that looked like it had seen many winters.
No lemon polished. No strand smiles.
Just quiet space. Martha showed Alara a small room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out onto the empty land. "This is your room," she said. "Keep it how you need it." She didn't specify how that should be. No rules about neatness, no expectations of how a child's room should look. Keep it how she needed it. It was a foreign concept, the permission to exist in a way that felt right, rather than a way that pleased others. The days settled into a rhythm dictated by the sun and the needs of the animals. Alara watched Martha from a distance at first. Martha fed the horses, mended fences, checked on the small herd of cattle that dotted the distant pastures. Her movements were economical, purposeful. She was a part of the land, not fighting it but moving with its demands. Alara started small. She collected smooth stones from the creek bed. She sorted seeds Martha kept in jars, arranging them by size and color. She discovered the quiet satisfaction of tasks with clear beginnings and ends. One afternoon, a dust storm blew in without warning. The sky turned an ominous hongseg, the wind howled, and the world outside became a churning, gritty chaos. Alara, overwhelmed by the noise and the stinging particles that found their way under the door, retreated under her bed, hands clamped over her ears, rocking. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, echoing the times she'd hidden from raised voices or unpredictable chaos in the orphanage. Martha found her there. She didn't scold or pull her out. She simply knelt by the bed, the lamp casting long shadows. She didn't try to talk over the wind's roar. Instead, she reached under the bed and placed a smooth, cool stone in Alara's hand. Alara's fingers closed around it. The stone was grounding, real, a point of stillness in the maelstrom. Martha stayed there, kneeling for a long time. The simple act of presence, silent and unwavering, was a lifeline. When the wind finally began to die down, Alara crawled out. Her face was streaked with tears and dust, but the fear was receding, replaced by a fragile sense of safety. Later that week, 2 men rode up to the house. They were strangers, their faces hard and unwelcoming. Alara, instinctively sensing danger, retreated behind Martha, who stood on the porch, arms crossed, a formidable figure. The men spoke loudly, their voices rough. Something about land boundaries, stray cattle, accusations laced with thinly veiled threats. Alara couldn't follow all the words, but she understood the tension, the predatory edge in their tone. This was the chaos she feared, made manifest in human form. Martha's voice was low but carried an steel edge Alara hadn't heard before. She didn't back down. She refuted their claims calmly but firmly, her eyes meeting theirs without flinching. One of the men dismounted, taking a step towards the porch, his hand resting on the gun tied to his hip. "Maybe you need a reminder who runs things out here, woman," he sneered. Alara's breath hitched. She wanted to disappear, to become invisible. But then she saw Martha's hand, held loosely by her side. It wasn't reaching for a weapon. It was an open hand, waiting. Suddenly, Alara stepped out from behind Martha. The men looked at her, surprised by the small, dusty figure. Alara didn't speak. She couldn't. But she looked at the man who had threatened Martha. She looked at his face, memorizing the lines of aggression around his eyes, the tension in his jaw. Then, she looked past him, towards the horizon, towards the places Martha had pointed out, the hawks circling, the distant climb of the land. She was absorbing the scene, cataloging it, understanding it in a way the men didn't. Her gaze was steady, intense, unnerving in its lack of typical childlike fear or deference. It wasn't a challenge, but it was a presence, unexpected and unyielding. The man hesitated, thrown by the quiet, unreadable child. Martha hadn't said a word, hadn't given a signal, but Alara's simple act of stepping forward, of seeing them, disrupted the intended intimidation. Martha's expression remained neutral, but Alara felt the shift in the air, a subtle acknowledgement. The moment stretched, taut and silent, the wind the only sound. The men exchanged glances. The one on the porch took a step back. "This ain't over, Martha," the other man muttered, but the bluster was gone. They remounted and rode away, leaving only dust in their wake. Martha watched them go, her posture still and strong. Only when they were specks on the horizon did she turn. She looked at Alara, not with surprise or confusion, but with that same quiet assessment Alara had first seen in her eyes back at the orphanage. Alara waited, unsure if she had done something wrong by stepping forward. Martha's gaze softened almost imperceptibly. "You have good eyes, Alara," she said, her voice low. "You see things others miss." It was the closest thing to praise Alara had ever received, and it landed not as a burden of expectation, but as a simple statement of truth. She saw things, and Martha saw that she saw. In that moment, the fragile thread of connection between them solidified into something stronger, tested by the dust and the threat, and found to hold. Life on the ranch wasn't easy. There were long days, hard work, and the constant challenge of the elements. But for Alara, it was a world that began to make sense. The animals followed predictable patterns. The tasks had logical sequences. The vastness of the land, once overwhelming, became a source of quiet awe. She learned the names of the plants, the calls of the birds, the subtle shifts in the weather that Martha seemed to read like a book. She still flinched at sudden loud noises, still preferred the company of the horses to strangers, still arranged her food before eating. But here, these things weren't seen as flaws or oddities to be corrected. They were simply Alara. Martha taught her without teaching, through shared work and silent example. How to mend a tear in a saddle, how to check a fence line, how to sit still and listen to the land. Alara, in turn, showed Martha the world through her eyes. She pointed out the intricate patterns in a frost-covered window pane, the specific shade of blue in a distant hill at sunset, the way the light caught the dust motes dancing in a sunbeam. Martha, who saw the land in terms of survival and work, began to see its quiet beauty through Alara's focused gaze. One evening, sitting by the fire, a rare moment of stillness between them, Martha spoke, her voice softer than usual. "They told me you were difficult, that you wouldn't settle." Alara traced a pattern on the hearth with her finger. "I just didn't know how to be what they wanted," she murmured. a truth she had never articulated before, even to herself. Martha was silent for a long moment. Then, she reached out and covered Alara's hand with her own. A brief, rough touch. "You don't have to be anything but yourself here, Alara," she said. "That's enough." It was more than enough. It was everything. The world outside the ranch, the world of orphanage rooms and judging eyes and whispered rejections, still existed, but its power over Alara had diminished. Here, under the vast, indifferent sky, she was finding her place, not by changing who she was, but by being accepted for it. The resilience they spoke of in hushed tones at the orphanage wasn't something she had to learn. It was something Martha recognized in her. The quiet, unyielding strength of a soul determined to survive on its own terms. They were an unlikely pair, the stoic, solitary woman and the sensitive, observant child, bound not by blood or societal expectation, but by a shared understanding forged in silence, hardship, and the quiet acceptance of one another's true nature. The land was vast and often unforgiving, but it was also a place of profound beauty and quiet rhythms, a mirror to the life they were building together. Alara had been searching for a home, a place to belong. She found it not in a perfect house or a conventional family, but in the quiet strength of a woman who saw her, truly saw her, and in the wide open spaces where she finally had the freedom to be herself. And in that acceptance, she didn't just find a home. She found her own strength, resilient and true, like the ancient stones she collected from the creek bed.